Immunology Insights, Basics and Beyond. Chapter 55. Asthma, Chronic Inflammation of the Airways. Marcello here. Welcome back to Immunology Insights, Basics and Beyond. In our last chapter, we explored the mechanisms of allergic reactions, how the immune system can turn its defensive machinery against harmless antigens like pollen or food. Today, we will focus on one of the most widespread and consequential allergic diseases, asthma. Asthma is more than just an occasional wheeze. It is a chronic inflammatory condition of the airways where the immune system remains hyperreactive long after the initial trigger is gone. It's an excellent example of how allergic inflammation can become self-sustaining and evolve into a persistent disease. This chapter follows naturally from our discussion of allergies, showing how repeated exposure to allergens and ongoing immune activation reshape the tissues themselves, transforming a reversible reaction into a chronic illness. So let's talk science. What is asthma? Asthma is a chronic inflammatory disorder of the lower airways characterized by reversible airflow obstruction, bronchial hyperresponsiveness, and airway remodeling. The symptoms, wheezing, shortness of breath, coughing, and chest tightness, result from a combination of inflammation, mucus overproduction, and smooth muscle contraction in the bronchi. While many cases are allergic or atopic in origin, triggered by pollen, dust mites, or animal dander, non-allergic forms also exist. These can be induced by viral infections, cold air, exercise, or even stress, each activating similar immune pathways in slightly different ways. Let's now look at the immunological mechanisms. The underlying process is often driven by a Th2 skewed immune response, similar to other allergic reactions. First, we have sensitization. Dendritic cells capture inhaled allergens and present them to naive T cells, steering them toward the Th2 phenotype. Second, we have the effector phase. Th2 cells release cytokines like IL-4, IL-5, and IL-13, prompting B cells to produce IgE antibodies. These antibodies bind to mast cells in the airway mucosa. Third, we have the inflammatory cascade. Upon re-exposure, mast cells degranulate, releasing histamine, prostaglandins, and leukotrienes, which cause bronchoconstriction and increased vascular permeability. Fourth, we have the eosinophil recruitment. IL-5 draws eosinophils to the lungs, where they release toxic proteins, for example, major basic protein, that damage airway epithelium and sustain inflammation. And fifth, we have the airway remodeling. Chronic inflammation leads to structural changes, smooth muscle thickening, goblet cell hyperplasia, and subepithelial fibrosis, making the airways more reactive over time. Over the years, these processes create a self-perpetuating cycle of inflammation and hypersensitivity. What are triggers and risk factors? Well, asthma doesn't stem from a single cause, but from an interplay of genetics and environment. First, we have a genetic predisposition. Variants in genes regulating IL-4, IL-13, or IgE production increase susceptibility. Second, we have environmental exposures. Indoor allergens, tobacco smoke, air pollution, and occupational irritants, like for example flour dust or isocyanates, heighten the risks. Third, we have early life influences. Viral infections or antibiotic use in infancy can alter the developing microbiome, predisposing to asthma, again supporting the hygiene hypothesis. And fourth, we have obesity and diet. Emerging evidence links chronic low-grade inflammation in obesity and processed diets with asthma severity. Asthma prevalence has risen sharply over the recent decades, especially in urban and industrialized settings, affecting nearly 1 in 10 children and 1 in 20 adults worldwide. Now let's look at the immune pathology and damage done. During an asthma attack, the airways narrow due to smooth muscle contraction, swelling, and mucus plugging. The immune cells that were once meant to protect now cause collateral damage. First, eosinophils and neutrophils injure the epithelium, exposing nerve endings that heighten sensitivity. Second, mast cells and basophils amplify inflammation with cytokines and lipid mediators. And third, T cells and innate lymphoid cells, so ILC2s, sustain chronic inflammation even between attacks. Repeated cycles of injury and repair gradually stiffen the airway walls, a process that, over time, limits reversibility and lung function. What are the different asthma phenotypes? Not all asthma is the same. Immunologists and clinicians now distinguish several subtypes. First, the allergic or eosinophilic asthma, the most common type driven by Th2 cytokines and IgE. Second, the non-allergic asthma, which involves neutrophilic or mixed inflammation often triggered by irritants or infections rather than allergens. Third, the late onset asthma that appears in adulthood, sometimes associated with obesity or sinus disease. And fourth, the exercise-induced asthma, narrowing of airways after exertion due to hyperventilation and airway cooling. This heterogeneity explains why treatment responses vary so much among patients. What works for one subtype may fail for another. There are systemic implications. Asthma is not only a lung disease, it also reflects broader immune dysregulation. Chronic airway inflammation can spill over into the bloodstream, promoting low-grade systemic inflammation and increasing the risk of cardiovascular and metabolic complications. It also fits into a larger clinical pattern known as the atopic march, a progression often seen in allergic individuals. Many patients begin in infancy with atopic dermatitis or eczema, later develop food allergies, and eventually allergic rhinitis and asthma. This sequence reflects how the immune system, once skewed toward Th2 dominant IgE mediated response early in life, can maintain that bias across organs and years. Environmental factors such as urban living, reduced microbial exposure, and air pollution further fuel this continuum, turning localized allergic tendencies into systemic immune overreactivity. Of course, this has global and clinical relevance. Asthma affects over 350 million people worldwide and causes nearly 500,000 deaths each year, mostly in low and middle income countries where access to diagnosis and medication remains limited. While it cannot be cured, it can be controlled. Inhaled corticosteroids remain the backbone of therapy, suppressing airway inflammation and preventing long-term remodeling. Bronchodilators like beta-2 agonists relax airway muscles for rapid relief during attacks. For severe or treatment-resistant cases, modern biologic, monoclonal antibodies targeting IgE, IL-5 or IL-4, IL-13 pathways have revolutionized management by addressing the disease at its immunological roots. Allergen avoidance, immunotherapy and lifestyle adjustments also play crucial roles. We will explore these therapeutic approaches in more depth in the next chapter, where we connect molecular understanding with real-world treatments that help patients breathe freely again. To conclude, asthma represents a crucial link between allergy and chronic disease, where acute immune hypersensitivity evolves into long-term inflammatory disorder. It teaches us how the immune system, once primed for protection, can transform the architecture of an organ through persistence and overreaction. In our next chapter, we will turn to treatment strategies for allergies and asthma, looking on how modern immunology has turned this understanding into life-changing therapies, from classic antihistamines and corticosteroids to cutting-edge biologics and immune desensitization. Before closing, I have a small request. If you enjoyed my content and want to hear more, please like and subscribe. It's a small step for you, but it helps me a lot. So thank you for listening and see you next time.